Hello and welcome back. I am really glad you're here. This week's topic is about friendships, just like our topic is so often. But what brought about what I want to talk about this week is that we are right in the middle of our relationships module for the students who are in the program at Starfish Social Club. And I've noticed some of the comments some of the students are making, some of the questions they've been asking, and just in other conversations that I've been having, I'm seeing things come up that are helping me recognize where some of the disconnect is when it comes to our autistic and ADHD kiddos and their perception of friendships. And I think it really helps us understand why this concept can be challenging for our kiddos. And when we see things through their perspective, it really helps give us a viewpoint into how we can help and what some of the misperceptions are that they may have about friends. So I've just written down several things that I know kids get a bit confused or misinformed about, as well as some things that have come up in the last few weeks that I thought were just really interesting perceptions and concepts. So I want to go through each one of them this week and just kind of lay out what it is that our kiddos might be thinking and how we can help them have a more realistic viewpoint of what friends are. I'll start this off by sharing what I believe makes a friend or a friendship. And this is what I teach the students in my program as well. What I share is that a friend is someone that we choose to spend time with and that we feel good spending time with. And of course, it has to be mutual. It has to go both ways. In some situations and circumstances, this narrows what people think of as a friend, because I do believe that in order for us to say somebody's our friend, we actually have to invest time with them. I believe that someone that we haven't really talked to in a couple of years slides into being an acquaintance, which is one of the things that we're going to talk about in this episode as well. On the other hand, there are different ways we can spend time with people. Texting is spending time with someone. Playing online video games is spending time with someone. So just because we're not sitting across a table or next to each other on the couch does not mean we're not choosing to spend time together. And I think this becomes more and more relevant and applicable as our kids are growing up in more and more electronic worlds. They're less likely to spend time with other people physically, and they're a lot more likely to spend time with other people electronically, texting, FaceTime, chatting, messaging, playing video games, those kinds of things. So that's my definition of friendship, is people who choose to spend time together, which also means outside of any obligation. So outside of school, outside of the club where you met, outside of that class that you're taking together, outside of that, you choose to spend time together and you enjoy spending time together. There are definitely people that we can choose to spend time with, even though we don't really enjoy it. And so that's why I add that second part into it. Now that I've established what I consider to be friends, let's talk about some of the misperceptions that our kids may have around friends. One of the things that I've mentioned in a recent episode is that sometimes I'll ask kids when I first meet them So tell me about friends. What does that mean to you? Tell me, when I say the word friends, what do you think of? What does that mean to you? And then I'll usually ask a follow-up question of, who are your friends? And depending on the kiddo's level of social awareness, I get a few different answers. One that's very common for kiddos who are a little less socially aware is they will just start naming names. They can come up with 8 names pretty easily. And what that tells me is that they do not understand what an acquaintance is. And usually they're just naming kids who are in their class at school, if they're in school. If they're not in school, maybe they're homeschooled, maybe they're older, they are just naming people they know. So this is a really big disconnect that I see, is that a lot of our students don't understand what an acquaintance is and how that's not a friend. And this is actually the lesson in week 2 of the module that we're on right now. The week 2 is all about acquaintances. And I created that lesson specifically for this reason, because I could see very clearly that so many of the students who come into the program at Starfish don't have a concept of what an acquaintance is. An acquaintance is somebody that you know. You don't have to know them well. You might not even know their name, but you have a sense of familiarity with them. There's some context where you guys are acquainted. You might live on the same street. You might be in the same class at school. It might be a friend of your parents. It may be the person who takes your order every week when you go to your favorite restaurant, the barista who makes your coffee at the place where you stop every morning, the custodian in your school. These are all examples of acquaintances. Your doctor. I give the example of my kitty cat's veterinarian. These are all acquaintances. They are not our friends. They haven't met the test of being a friend, but we know them. And one of the scenarios I like to create, especially when we're practicing what it means to be an acquaintance and what the expectations are, is I talk to kids about, if you saw this person in the grocery store, would you recognize them? And again, we might not always know their name. We might not know the name of the person who lives 2 houses down from us. We might not know the name of that teacher who teaches in our school but isn't our teacher, but we recognize them. We have context for where we know them from. This is an acquaintance. In classrooms, almost everybody in that classroom is an acquaintance. They're not a friend. If your child is not spending time with them outside of school, they're an acquaintance. And so many of our kids just don't have a concept of an acquaintance. Even week 1 of the program, we talk all about strangers and people we don't know, and how we move from not knowing somebody to actually them becoming somebody that we do know. And even after the lesson on that, week 1, we talked about at the end of week 1, how once you meet somebody for the first time, you are now acquaintances. And so the beginning of week 2, I do a recap. Remember last week we talked about strangers, and these are all the things we talked about. And at the end of the lesson last week, we talked about when you meet somebody that you didn't know before, what are they now? And even in the recap, one of the students said, a friend. That's why I do a recap. I repeat things over and over because I know that everybody's coming into this program with preconceived notions about everything. That's how we function as human beings. And so I repeat things over and over because I know that maybe sometimes we weren't listening. Maybe sometimes we forgot. Maybe sometimes it's not a strong enough message to overcome our preconceived notion. So even though we'd already talked specifically about how meeting somebody new does not make them a friend, it makes them an acquaintance, I still had a kiddo that when I asked that question a week later said, that's now a friend. It's not, it's an acquaintance. And I think this type of relationship gets very glossed over, very overlooked. And I think there's a couple social situations that I noticed that I think really contribute to this. One of them is that as a society, we tend to use the word friend very liberally. I'm thinking of preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade classrooms when teachers refer to the group as friends. Okay, friends, we're going to get ready to go to recess now. Or they will refer to one student as another student's friend. Well, did you ask your friend if you can play? So especially with younger kids, we tend to use the word friend very liberally. And I'll say, even if you're on my email list, a few years ago, I had a different system. And when I transitioned to the system we use now, it requires somebody's name. So when you sign up for my email list, it doesn't have to be your name. System doesn't know the difference, but it requires a name. And my system previously didn't require a name. So when I transferred the people who were in the old system into the new system, I had to give them a name. But I don't know everybody that's on my email list. Some of them aren't even acquaintances of mine, they're strangers. And so the only thing I could think of that I could put that would be appropriate for everybody was friend. And so if you've been on my email list for, I would say, more than 3 years, your emails come to you as, hey, friend. If you're newer to my email list, it will have your name because you signed up with your name or somebody's name. Again, I don't know. But I actually felt really uncomfortable labeling people as friend in my email list because we're not friends. And I'm sure, I don't know that any of you guys who get those emails have ever even noticed or thought about that, but it bothers me because I think it contributes to this confusion about friendship. I'm a contributing factor to the confusion about what it really means for someone to be a friend. So that's the first concept, is a lot of our kids, adults, doesn't really, everything I talk about here is applicable to anybody. It doesn't really matter how old we are. A lot of my students aren't aware of the concept of an acquaintance until they go through my program. And so sometimes they just start naming people that they know and they consider them to be friends, when in reality, they're not spending any time with these kids outside of school. Or it could be people they used to play with 2 years ago who maybe don't even live in the state anymore. So that's a really important concept, is the concept of acquaintances. What is an acquaintance? So I mentioned how one reason this gets pretty cloudy is because we, the royal we, use the word friend very liberally. I even, my favorite podcaster refers to everybody as friends. And she says, hey, it's your friend. And then she introduces herself. And I love her. She's my favorite podcaster. But every time when she starts her episodes that way, it makes me cringe a little bit, because the reality is that we're not friends. We're not even acquaintances. We're strangers. So that makes me a little bit nutty. And I totally understand why she does it and why teachers do it, why the royal we engage in that. It's totally understandable. We're trying to build connections. We're trying to build relationships. We're trying to have a reputation for being friendly. It's very understandable where it comes from. It's just very confusing, especially to people whose brains are black and white. And so friend means friend, and they have a hard time untangling that. Another thing that contributes to this is if your kiddos are on social media, specifically Facebook, because think about Facebook. What are the people that you are connected to on Facebook called? What are they referred to as? On Facebook, they are referred to as friends. And if you follow Starfish Social Club on Facebook or Instagram, I posted a picture the other day when we were talking about acquaintances, and it said something about how most of the people in your Facebook feed aren't your friends. They are your acquaintances. And that's so true. Most of the people, there could be people that you are connected to on Facebook that you don't actually know. Different ones of us do that to varying degrees. I tend to not connect to people I don't know, but some people friend request anybody and everybody, and some people accept friend requests from anybody and everybody. So the number of people that are your Facebook friends who are your real life friends is actually really low. Most of the people that you're connected to on Facebook are your acquaintances. And so that's another situation that contributes to the confusion with people who are black and white thinkers around what a friend actually is. You may be wondering, why does it really matter? Why does it matter if my kiddo refers to other people as friends, even when they're not? Why does it matter if my kiddo thinks he has 14 friends, even when he doesn't? It matters because the expectations, the social expectations between acquaintances and friends are different. A great example is that we are expected to engage in small talk when we run into one of our acquaintances. But even things like the question, how's it going? Or how are you? When an acquaintance asks us that question, the expected response is the social fake. It's something like, I'm good, I'm okay, how are you? Even if we're not good or if we're not okay. With an acquaintance, we're just trying to be polite and friendly. And so usually we do the social fake, even if things aren't really so great. It would be really awkward for an acquaintance to ask us how we're doing and for us to unload on them about how we've had a really rough day or about how we're having problems in our marriage or at work. Those conversations are for friends and family. And so it's important to know the difference. One of the big challenges that people with ADHD have is that we tend to be oversharers. And I've found myself in this situation as well. I have one situation that's always at the top of my mind where I definitely confused an acquaintance for a friend. And I shared information. It wasn't anything, wrong with the information I shared. It was just friend level information, not acquaintance level information. And so when people self-identify or are pointed out as an oversharer, this is usually the issue, is that we are talking to acquaintances as if they were friends. It's a big distinction between the two. And it's also a good way to keep that acquaintance from not becoming a friend if we're treating them like a friend when they're an acquaintance. So this is one of the reasons why it actually does matter how we perceive people in our world and how we refer to them, because there are expectations at every level of relationship. And if we're confused about what level of relationship we have with somebody, we're probably going to end up in some socially awkward situations just because we're unclear about the level that we're at with this person. So that's the conversation about friends versus acquaintances. It's probably one of the biggest obstacles I see with students is just that lack of understanding of the whole section of relationships that is acquaintances. Similar to this is the concept that anybody we like is a friend and anybody we don't like isn't a friend. So again, with this black and white thinking, there's no distinction for some students between whether we actually spend time with this person, whether we have anything in common. There's no distinction between whether any steps have been taken to actually have this be a friendship. There's just this black and white idea that the people I like, I say are my friends, and the people I don't like, I say aren't my friends. So it's very similar to just the lack of awareness about the concept of an acquaintance. It's just putting people into two buckets. It also means people can jump from one bucket to the other. If you think about little kids and, you're not my friend anymore, or they'll come home and say they just made a new best friend, right? It's because in this concept, people can jump from the friend bucket to the non-friend bucket purely based on how we feel about them that day. So again, this is our kiddos who tend to be a little less socially aware, a little more socially immature, that their whole concept of who is a friend and who isn't a friend is just based on whether we like them or not. Also, there's usually no distinction for the students who perceive friendship that way. There's no distinction between, let's say, a family member, a teacher, a peer, the cashier at the grocery store. There's no distinction between any of these people. They either like them or they don't. So they could have two teachers, and one they say is a friend because they like them, and one they say isn't because they don't. They could have two uncles, and one is a friend because they like them, and one is a friend because they don't. One isn't a friend because they don't. But in reality, teachers aren't friends. Teachers are acquaintances, and that should always be the case. Teachers are not friends. Uncles are not friends. Uncles are family. So this misperception leads to kind of everybody in the world falling into one of those two buckets, friend or not friend, without the context that some of them are acquaintances, some of them are family. They not everybody even falls into the bucket of friend or not friend. Another misconception, this one I tend to see with kids who are a little bit older, a little bit more socially mature, socially aware, is there tends to be kind of a basic understanding of acquaintances and friends, and kind of a basic understanding that the two aren't the same. But there can sometimes also be this feeling that we should be trying to make all of our acquaintances friends. And so it's almost like we're doing something wrong if we have acquaintances and they don't ever turn into friends. And so I was talking to a kiddo a couple of weeks ago, and something like that came up with him. And I just realized that he was under this notion that everybody that he's an acquaintance with, something should be happening that's moving them into a friendship. And he was kind of frustrated, concerned, confused because that's not happening. The reality about acquaintances is that most people who are our acquaintances will always be our acquaintances. Most acquaintances do not move into the friendship category. And again, if you think about it, we have so many more people that fall under the acquaintance umbrella than we probably could even sit here and list. Again, anybody that's in your class at school that you're not spending time with outside of school, which is most, if not all of the kids. If you're in middle school, high school, college, that goes for every class you have. Even all the teachers you've had in the past. If you're an adult, coworkers are acquaintances. Anybody that you see on a regular basis. I mentioned a doctor, a veterinarian, a barista, a waiter or waitress, people that you see on a regular basis, your neighbors. Most of the people that are our acquaintances will not go on to become our friends. And that is just the reality of acquaintances. That has nothing to do with any person being unlikable or with anybody not wanting to be their friend. It's a kind of like a numbers game. If you have 100 acquaintances, very few of them are you going to build a relationship with, and that's going to move into a friendship. Most of the acquaintances in our lives are passing. They're in our lives for a reason, right? So they're in our lives because they're performing a service for us, or we're performing a service for them, or because we live in this neighborhood, or because we're in this classroom, or because we have this job. These are all acquaintances. And yes, they can become our friends if we take steps and actions to make that happen. But just because they don't does not mean that there's something wrong with us or that we've done something wrong. Most acquaintances will always stay acquaintances. And so that's another misperception that our students can have sometimes, is they think that that everybody should be moving along this pipeline from acquaintance to friend. And in reality, very few people actually do. Another thing that I've noticed with some of my students is that they take it personally when a friendship runs its course. Most people listening to this are, similar age to me, 30s, 40s, 50s, somewhere in there. Think about how many friendships in your life have come and gone. It could be because people have moved. I shared a couple podcasts ago, I moved 6 months ago, and it definitely affected my friendships. I don't even live close enough to, go visit for the weekend without, time and expense. So moving definitely disrupts friendships. Life changes, getting married, getting divorced, having kids, changing jobs. All these things have the possibility of affecting our friendships. And so it's another conversation I had with a student is, again, him feeling like if a friendship runs its course, it's because he did something wrong. Friendships naturally come and go. And that's where we talk about people being in your life for a season. The season is an indeterminate amount of time, but most friendships last for a season. It could be, if we're talking about kids, the year that they are in class with this other kid, that's their season. The 3 years that you guys live next door to this other family, the 5 years that they're in this, what am I trying to say? Recreational activity, martial arts, or social skills, or basketball. Usually, when the context of where we spend time with someone, when that breaks apart for whatever reason, it is not uncommon for that friendship to just fade away. And it does not mean, usually, it doesn't mean anybody's done anything. It just means, friendships are based on being able to spend time together, as we talked about. And sometimes we either don't have the ability to keep spending time together, or we choose not to keep spending time together. Again, life changes can be a big contributing factor to that. We tend to spend time with people that we relate to, people we feel connected with. And so if you are a young adult and you have a friend that maybe you met in college and you guys graduate, you are most likely going to go in different directions just because that's what happens as people get older. So relationships, marriages, having kids, those tend to affect friendships, as does starting a career, especially if maybe the rest of your friends aren't doing that. And so they're all still hanging out together, but you're working or you're going to bed at 10 o'clock at night. Traveling, moving, changing hobbies. That's another big one. That's another transition I went through recently, is changing hobbies. That really affected my friendships as well. So friendships coming and going is actually a really natural part of going through life. We do have people who will always be on our friendship wagon, if you will, especially as you get older and you have more established friendships. You may have people that you haven't talked to in 5 years, but then something happens and you reconnect and it's like nothing has changed. It may happen at, you may go to a high school reunion and reconnect with somebody that you were really close to when you were in school. So there are definitely people in our lives that are those lifetime people. We all need some lifetime people, but they are very rare. Friendships just naturally tend to come and go. And just because a friendship is on its way out does not necessarily mean that it's because of anything that we've done. It may be, right? I mean, just to be honest, to be realistic, it may be, but it's also just part of going through life. It's part of everybody being on a different path, going in a different direction at a different speed. And so friendships coming and going are just part of life. That has nothing to do with us as a person when friendships go, when people make new friends, or when they stop spending as much time with us. It's just part of life. Those are the main things I've noticed when it comes to the misperceptions that kids have about friends. I also think that those misperceptions can make the whole concept of friends feel heavier for our kids than it really needs to be. I think it sometimes causes them to take on a lot of burden for not having friends, when really it doesn't always have anything to do with them. Sometimes it's just situational. I want to add to this episode how we move from being an acquaintance to being a friend, because this is where I notice that there's the most confusion and just uncertainty with my students is how do you move from being an acquaintance to being a friend? Because friendship is based on spending time together, that's what has to start happening. I'm just going to go with two people because it's easier to talk about with two people, but it can definitely be a group as well. Two people, ideally, if we're looking to turn an acquaintance into a friend, ideally we have things in common with them. Which actually reminds me, another conversation I had with a student was, we were talking about this, about how to transition from being an acquaintance to a friend. And he said his concern is if they started hanging out together, they wouldn't have anything to talk about. And so my response to that was, then you're trying to become friends too soon. Because as an acquaintance, that's when you guys are exposed to each other in the context where you know each other, whether it's school, whether it's a club, whether it's a group, whether it's work, you're exposed to each other in that context. And what typically happens is certain people just kind of gravitate toward each other and start engaging in small talk, start kind of maybe choosing to sit near each other, choosing to chat with each other. This is how acquaintances become a little bit closer, is that you start to seek this person out. You guys start to maybe walk together. Maybe you leave class together. Maybe you take breaks together at work. So as long as both people are feeling like this is, that they're happy with this arrangement, what needs to start happening next for this to evolve into a friendship is some plans need to be made. You guys actually need to start spending time together away from where you know each other. So outside of school, outside of Starfish Social Club, outside of work, wherever it is that you know this person from, plans need to be made to spend time outside of that place together. Before you're ready for that, we need to have a sense of what we have in common with this other person. If you do not know what you have in common with them, we are not ready to start making plans with them. Knowing what you have in common with somebody actually makes it a lot easier to make plans with them because you can base it around what you have in common. Here's how I recommend that my students make plans with another person. Again, we have to establish what we have in common with each other. We have to already know that. So it could be, maybe we both really like to talk about movies. Maybe we both like to watch basketball. Maybe we both really like roller coasters. Maybe we both love to talk about our cats. Maybe we both really like a certain video game. Whatever it may be, that's a great way to open the door for making plans. So you can say something like, hey, I'm thinking about going to this event, to this place, whatever. Would you be interested in going with me? Or you can say something like, hey, would you be interested in going to the movies sometime? Okay, so it can be a specific event or an activity, or it can be broad or general. But you're just going to ask if they would be interested. And you're going to get one of three responses. One of them is yes. You'll be able to tell by their engagement that they're interested. Even if they can't make it to the specific thing that you're talking about, you'll be able to tell that they're interested in hanging out with you. A second option is no. They're not interested. And that's okay. Sometimes people just want to be acquaintances. They just want to be work buddies. They just want to be classmates. They just want to chat at lunch. That's okay. It's totally okay if somebody says no. The third option, which is actually more likely than a no, is that they're going to be kind of non-committal. And so this could be where they say something like, oh, yeah, I'm not really interested in that. But you don't know if that means they don't want to hang out with you or if that means they don't want to do this thing. Or they might say something like, oh, I'm not available this weekend. But again, you don't really know if that means they don't want to hang out with you or if they're really not available this weekend. So that's not that uncommon. It comes from people's lack of desire to be straightforward and honest. If that happens, what I recommend is that you just let it go and you wait and see what they do next. Nothing about your acquaintanceship has to change. You can keep chatting, you can keep talking just like you have been, but then you can wait and see what they do next. They may never bring it up again and you guys just stay acquaintances, or they may ask you if you want to do something the next weekend. And that's when you know they really were just busy, but they're interested in hanging out with you. Okay, so those are the three different paths. Is you'll get a yes, that's when we're going to move forward. You'll get a no, that's when we just stay acquaintances, or you'll get confused. And that's when we just stay acquaintances and we wait to see what they choose to do next. One more suggestion I have, which actually comes from being a woman in the dating world, but I think it's applicable to everybody. If you think about, no matter what gender you are, well, no matter what age you are, if you think about if you're having a conversation with somebody and you are more interested in just staying acquaintances, you're not really interested in anything more, and they ask for your phone number, think about that feeling. Think about kind of that awkwardness of somebody asking for your phone number when you really would prefer not to share it. I have a student who has told me that he's asked a girl for her phone number and she told him she didn't have a phone, which he knew was not true. So he knew that she was not telling him the truth. We definitely want to avoid that. Sometimes people give the wrong phone number, which we don't really want our kids being in that situation either. So to avoid all that uncomfortableness, here's what I teach kids to do. When you're ready to make plans with somebody, ask if you can give them your phone number. Phone number, gamer tag, whatever contact information you want to share, ask if you can give them your number. Because somebody can say yes to that and then never do anything with it. And that's totally fine. But it's much more comfortable than having to give somebody your number when you don't really want to. So if I'm going to try to make plans with somebody, I'm going to say, can I give you my number? And most of the time people will take it and then it's up to them. Then we just let it go and we leave it up to them. They are either going to call us or text us or they're not. It's totally up to them. If they call us or text us, now we know we're both interested, we're ready to move forward. If they don't, we're not going to bring it up again. We're going to recognize that that's them saying no, thank you. And we can continue being acquaintances with them. We can continue chatting with them. We can continue hanging out, but we're going to let go of trying to make plans with them. If we give them our number or our gamer tag or our social media handle and they don't reach out, we're going to let that go. But that's how we move from an acquaintance to a friend, is we actually start making plans with somebody. We all have this innate fear of rejection. And so this tends to make my students pretty anxious, the thought of asking somebody to make plans. But if you've already been hanging out with somebody and chatting with somebody, the odds of them saying no are pretty small. If you've already been getting along with this other person, there's a good chance that they're going to want to hang out with you more. Where this can get tripped up is if we haven't been hanging out with this other person yet. It's the same as asking somebody on a date. If we've never had a conversation, if we have no connection, if I have no idea what we have in common, I would be really apprehensive about accepting a date offer from someone in that situation. So it's the same with friendships and dating. We need to have had exposure to this person and have had conversations with them in order to have an idea of what we have in common, so that we have some ideas of what we could do together, how we could spend our time together, how we could hang out together. Okay, so those are some of the misconceptions our kiddos have when it comes to friendships. Also, how they can move from being an acquaintance to being a friend. And on my next solo episode, I'm going to talk about some of the misconceptions adults have about kid friendships and how we actually may be making it more difficult for our kids. So thank you for being here. I am really glad that you're here, and I'll see you again next week.